Hello, I'm Storyman, and this is February of 2022. The well-known story of Aladdin is another of the 1001 Nights, often referred to as the Arabian Nights. Now, I find the Arabian Nights title a bit of a misnomer, as the stories seem to be set more often in Persia or in China, as is this one. Perhaps it is similar to how the English Shakespeare set many of his plays in Italy. It's in some other place. Now, even though these stories are centuries old, I am very aware of what some might consider the objectionable quality of these stories. The stories show clear prejudices, foolish decisions by people of high rank, a lack of respect for women, a tendency to accept wealth as the mark of a virtuous character, court intrigues, falsity, ignorance, greed, and many other negative qualities, which are often presented as virtues. However, I would ask my listeners to think of these stories as social commentaries on life of the day, and in fact, on life in our day as well. These attitudes and failings existed, and they still exist, and often can be clearly seen among the highest ranking of our modern societies. I will leave my listeners to think about specifics on their own. Some parts of these stories seem designed to point out flaws in the way things were, and other parts seem to be just the accepted standards of the day, as would be written into a story from that time and place. I find one interesting part is the attitudes toward women. Women seem to be treated as a type of lower-class citizen, almost like property of the men in their lives. And that seems to be a reflection of the way things were in that day and place. But at the same time, these stories often show the women to have more wisdom than the men do, and often more than the male rulers. Even though these stories have been translated into English, it's clear from the wording that the original writers or tale-tellers were intelligent, observant, and telling their stories more for the benefit of adults than for children. Small children might be able to enjoy these stories, but they are written primarily for thinking youths and adults who will see the deeper implications brought up by them. One final point is that, at least according to Wikipedia, it seems that Aladdin was not part of the collection in its most ancient Arabic versions. It was added by Antoine Galland in his French translation of the 1001 Nights in the early 18th century, after he heard the story from the Syrian storyteller Hannah Diab. With that said, I hope you will enjoy this telling of the story of Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp. The story of Aladdin, or the Wonderful Lamp. In the capital of one of the large and rich provinces of the Kingdom of China, there lived a tailor named Mustafa, who was so poor that he could hardly by his daily labor maintain himself and his family, which consisted of a wife and son. His son, who was called Aladdin, had been brought up in a very careless and idle manner, and by that means had contracted many vicious habits. He was obstinate and disobedient to his father and mother, who, when he grew up, could not keep him within doors. He was in the habit of going out early in the morning and would stay out all day, playing in the streets with idle children of his own age. When he was old enough to learn a trade, his father, not being able to put him out to any other, took him into his own shop and taught him how to use his needle. But neither fair words nor the fear of chastisement were capable of fixing his lively genius. All his father's endeavors to keep him to his work were in vain, for no sooner was his back turned than he was gone for that day. Mustafa chastised him, but Aladdin was incorrigible, and his father, to his great grief, was forced to abandon him to his idleness, and was so much troubled at not being able to reclaim him that it threw him into a fit of sickness, of which he died in a few months. The mother, finding that her son would not follow his father's business, shut up the shop, sold off the implements of trade, and with the money she received for them, and what she could get by spinning cotton, thought to maintain herself and her son. Aladdin, who was now no longer restrained by the fear of a father, and who cared so little for his mother that whenever she chid him he would abuse her, gave himself entirely over to his idle habits, and was never out of the streets from his companions. This course he followed till he was 15 years old, without giving his mind to any useful pursuit or the least reflection on what would become of him. In this situation, as he was one day playing with his vagabond associates, a stranger passing by stood to observe him. This stranger was a sorcerer, called the African magician, as he was a native of Africa, and had been but 2 days arrived from thence. The African magician, who was a good physiognomist, observing in Aladdin's countenance something absolutely necessary for the execution of the design he was engaged in, inquired artfully about his family, who he was, and what were his inclinations, and when he had learned all he desired to know, went up to him, and taking him aside from his comrades, said, "Child, was not your father called Mustafa the tailor?" "Yes, sir," answered the boy, "but he has been dead a long time." At these words the African magician threw his arms about Aladdin's neck and kissed him several times with tears in his eyes. Aladdin, who observed his tears, asked him what made him weep. "Alas, my son," cried the African magician with a sigh, "how can I forbear? I am your uncle. Your worthy father was my own brother. I have been many years abroad, and now I am come home with the hopes of seeing him. You tell me he is dead? But it is some relief to my affliction that I knew you at first sight. You are so like him." Then he asked Aladdin, putting his hand into his purse where his mother lived, and as soon as he had informed him, gave him a handful of small money, saying, "Go, my son, to your mother, give my love to her, and tell her that I will visit her tomorrow, that I may have the satisfaction of seeing where my good brother lived so long." As soon as the African magician left his newly adopted nephew, Aladdin ran to his mother, overjoyed at the money his uncle had given him. "Mother," said he, "have I an uncle?" "No, child," replied his mother, "you have no uncle by your father's side or mine." "I am just now come," said Aladdin, "from a man who says he is my uncle on my father's side. He cried and kissed me when I told him my father was dead, and to show you that what I tell you is truth," added he, pulling out the money, "see what he has given me. He charged me to give his love to you, and to tell you that tomorrow he will come and pay you a visit, that he may see the house my father lived and died in." "Indeed, child," replied the mother, "your father had a brother, but he has been dead a long time, and I never heard of another." The mother and son talked no more then of the African magician, but the next day Aladdin's uncle found him playing in another part of the town with other youths, and embracing him as before, put 2 pieces of gold into his hand, and said to him, "Carry this child to your mother. Tell her that I will come and see her tonight, and bid her get us something for supper. But first, show me the house where you live." After Aladdin had shown the African magician the house, he carried the 2 pieces of gold to his mother, and when he had told her of his uncle's intention, she went out and bought provisions. She spent the whole day in preparing the supper, and at night, when it was ready, said to her son, Perhaps your uncle knows not how to find our house. Go and bring him if you meet with him." Though Aladdin had showed the magician the house, he was ready to go when somebody knocked at the door, which he immediately opened, and the magician came in loaded with wine and all sorts of fruits, which he brought for a dessert. After the African magician had given what he brought into Aladdin's hands, he saluted his mother and desired her to show him the place where his brother Mustafa used to sit on the sofa. And when she had so done, he fell down and kissed it several times, crying out with tears in his eyes, "My poor brother! How unhappy I am not to have come soon enough to give you one last embrace." Aladdin's mother desired him to sit down in the same place, but he declined. "No," said he, "but give me leave to sit opposite, that although I am deprived of the satisfaction of seeing one so dear to me, I may at least have the pleasure of beholding the place where he used to sit." When the magician had sat down, he began to enter into discourse with Aladdin's mother. "My good sister," said he, "do not be surprised at your never having seen me all the time you are married to my brother Mustafa. I have been 40 years absent from this country, which is my native place, as well as my late brother's, and during that time have traveled into the Indies, Persia, Arabia, Syria, and Egypt, have resided in the finest towns of those countries, and afterward crossed over into Africa, where I made a longer stay. At last, as it is natural for a man to remember his native country, I was desirous to see mine again, and to embrace my dear brother. And finding I had strength enough to undertake so long a journey, I immediately made the necessary preparations and set out. I will not tell you the length of time it took me, all the obstacles I met with, and what fatigues I have endured to come hither. But nothing ever afflicted me so much as hearing of my brother's death. I observed his features in the face of my nephew, your son, and distinguished him among a number of lads with whom he was at play. He can tell you how I received the most melancholy news that ever reached my ears. But God be praised for all things. It is a comfort for me to find, as it were, my brother in a son, who has his most remarkable features." The African magician, perceiving that the widow began to weep at the remembrance of her husband, changed the conversation, and turning toward her son, asked him his name. "I am called Aladdin," said he. "Well, Aladdin," replied the magician, "what business do you follow? Are you of any trade?" At this question the youth hung down his head and was not a little abashed when his mother answered, "Aladdin is an idle fellow. His father, when alive, strove all he could to teach him his trade, but could not succeed. And since his death he does nothing but idle away his time in the streets, as you saw him, without considering he is no longer a child. And if you do not make him ashamed of it, I despair of his ever coming to any good. He knows that his father left him no fortune, and sees me endeavor to get bread by spinning cotton. For my part, I am resolved one of these days to turn him out of doors and let him provide for himself." After these words, Aladdin's mother burst into tears, and the magician said, "This is not well, nephew. You must think of getting your livelihood. There are many sorts of trades. Consider if you have not an inclination to some of them. Perhaps you do not like your father's and would prefer another. Come, do not disguise your sentiments from me. I will endeavor to help you." But finding that Aladdin returned no answer, "If you have no mind," continued he, "to learn any handicraft, I will take a shop for you. Furnish it with all sorts of fine stuffs and linens, and with the money you make of them, lay in fresh goods, and then you will live in an honorable way. Consult your inclination, and tell me freely what you think of my proposal." This plan greatly flattered Aladdin, who hated work, but had sense to know that such shops were much frequented, and the owners respected. He told the magician he had a greater inclination to that business than to any other, and that he should be much obliged to him for his kindness. "Since this profession is agreeable to you," said the African magician, "I will carry you with me tomorrow.
clothe you as handsomely as the best merchants in the city, and afterward we will think of opening a shop, as I mentioned."
The widow, who never till then could believe that the magician was her husband's brother, no longer doubted after his promises of kindness to her son. She thanked him for his good intentions, and after having exhorted Aladdin to render himself worthy of his uncle's favor by good behavior, served up supper, at which they talked of several indifferent matters, and then the magician, who saw that the night was pretty far advanced, took his leave and retired. He came again the next day, as he had promised, and took Aladdin with him to a merchant who sold all sorts of clothes for different ages and ranks, ready-made, and a variety of fine stuffs. He asked to see some that suited Aladdin in size, and Aladdin, charmed with the liberality of his new uncle, made choice of one, and the magician immediately paid for it. When the boy found himself so handsomely equipped, he returned his uncle thanks, who promised never to forsake him, but always to take him along with him, which he did to the most frequented places in the city, and particularly where the principal merchants kept their shops. When he brought him into the street where they sold the richest stuffs and finest linens, he said to Aladdin, "As you are soon to be a merchant, it is proper you should frequent these shops and be acquainted with them." He then showed him the largest and finest mosques, carried him to the khans or inns where the merchants and travelers lodged, and afterward to the sultan's palace, where he had free access, and at last brought him to his own khan, where, meeting with some merchants he had become acquainted with since his arrival, he gave them a treat to bring them and his pretended nephew acquainted. This entertainment lasted till night, when Aladdin would have taken leave of his uncle to go home, but the magician would not let him go by himself, but conducted him to his mother, who, as soon as she saw him so well dressed, was transported with joy, and bestowed 1,000 blessings upon the magician for being at so great an expense for her child. "Generous relation," said she, "I know not how to thank you for your liberality. I wish you may live long enough to witness my son's gratitude, which he cannot better show than by regulating his conduct by your good advice."
"Aladdin," replied the magician, "is a good boy, and I believe we shall do very well. But I am sorry for one thing, which is that I cannot perform tomorrow what I promised, because as it is Friday the shops will be shut up, and therefore we cannot hire or furnish one till Saturday. I will, however, call on him tomorrow and take him to walk in the gardens, where people of the best fashion generally resort. Perhaps he has never seen these amusements. He has only hitherto been among children. But now he must see men."
The African magician then took his leave of the mother and the son and retired. Aladdin rose early the next morning, dressed himself to be ready, and after he had waited some time, began to be impatient and stood watching at the door. But as soon as he perceived his uncle coming, he told his mother, took his leave of her, and ran to meet him. The magician caressed Aladdin and said, "Come, my dear child, and I will show you fine things." He then led him out at one of the gates of the city to some magnificent palaces, to each of which belonged beautiful gardens into which anybody might enter. At every building he came to, he asked Aladdin if he did not think it fine, and the youth was ready to answer when anyone presented itself, crying, "Here is a finer house, uncle, than any we have seen yet." By this artifice the cunning magician led Aladdin some way into the country, and as he meant to carry him farther, pretending to be tired, he took an opportunity to sit down in one of the gardens on the brink of a fountain of clear water which discharged itself by a lion's mouth of bronze into a basin. "Come, nephew," said he, "you must be weary as well as I. Let us rest ourselves, and we shall be better able to pursue our walk." After they had sat down, the magician pulled from his girdle a handkerchief with cakes and fruit which he had provided, and laid them on the edge of the basin.
He broke a cake in two, gave one half to Aladdin, and ate the other himself, and in regard to the fruit, left him at liberty to take which sort he liked best. During this short repast he exhorted his nephew to leave off keeping company with vagabonds, and seek that of wise and prudent men, to improve by their conversation. For, said he, you will soon be at man's estate, and you cannot too early begin to imitate their example. When they had eaten as much as they liked, they pursued their walk through gardens separated from one another only by small ditches which marked out the limits, without interrupting the communication. So great was the confidence the inhabitants reposed in each other. By this means, the African magician drew Aladdin insensibly beyond the gardens and crossed the country till they nearly reached the mountains. Aladdin, who had never been so far before, began to find himself much tired, and said to the magician, "Where are we going, uncle? We have left the gardens a great way behind us, and I see nothing but mountains. If we go much farther, I do not know whether I shall be able to reach the town again." "Never fear, nephew," said the false uncle. "I will show you another garden which surpasses all we have yet seen. And when we come there, you will say that you would have been sorry to have been so nigh and not seen it." Aladdin was soon persuaded, and the magician, to make the way seem shorter and less fatiguing, told him a great many stories. At last they arrived between two mountains of moderate height and equal size, divided by a narrow valley, which was the place where the magician intended to execute the design that had brought him from Africa to China. "We will go no farther now," said he to Aladdin. "I will show you here some extraordinary things, which, when you have seen, you will thank me for. But while I strike a light, gather up all the loose dry sticks you can see to kindle a fire with." Aladdin collected a great heap, and the magician presently set them on fire, and when they were in a blaze, threw in some incense, which raised a cloud of smoke. This he dispersed on each side by pronouncing several magical words which the lad did not understand. At the same time, the earth, trembling, opened just before the magician and uncovered a stone laid horizontally with a brass ring fixed into the middle. Aladdin was so frightened at what he saw that he would have run away, but the magician caught hold of him, abused him, and gave him such a box on the ear that he knocked him down. Aladdin got up trembling, and with tears in his eyes said to the magician, "What have I done, uncle, to be treated in this severe manner?" "I have my reasons," answered the magician. "I am your uncle. I supply the place of your father, and you ought to make no reply. But, child," added he, softening, "do not be afraid, for I shall not ask anything of you but that you obey me punctually, if you would reap the advantages which I intend you." These fair promises calmed Aladdin's fears and resentment, and when the magician saw that he was appeased, he said to him, "You see what I have done by virtue of my incense and the words I pronounced. Know then that under this stone there is hidden a treasure destined to be yours, and which will make you richer than the greatest monarch in the world. No person but yourself is permitted to lift this stone or enter this cave, so you must punctually execute what I may command, for it is a matter of great consequence, both to you and me." Aladdin, amazed at all he saw, and heard the magician say of the treasure which was to make him happy forevermore, forgot what was past, and rising said, "Well, uncle, what is to be done? Command me. I am ready to obey." "I am overjoyed, child," said the African magician, embracing him. "Take hold of the ring and lift up that stone." "Indeed, uncle," replied Aladdin, "I am not strong enough. You must help me." "You have no occasion for my assistance," answered the magician. "If I help you, we shall be able to do nothing. Take hold of the ring, pronounce the names of your father and grandfather, then lift it up, and you will find it will come easily." Aladdin did as the magician bade him, raised the stone with ease, and laid it on one side. When the stone was pulled up, there appeared a cavity of about 3 or 4 feet deep, with a little door and steps to go down lower. "Observe, my son," said the African magician, "what I direct. Descend into the cave, and when you are at the bottom of those steps, you will find a door which will lead you into a spacious vault, divided into 3 great halls, in each of which you will see 4 large brass cisterns placed on each side, full of gold and silver. But take care you do not meddle with them. Before you enter the first hall, be sure to tuck up your vest, wrap it about you, and then pass through the second into the third without stopping. Above all, have a care that you do not touch the walls, for if you do, you will die instantly. At the end of the third hall, you will find a door which opens into a garden planted with fine trees loaded with fruit. Walk directly across the garden by a path which will lead you to 5 steps that will bring you upon a terrace, where you will see a niche before you, and in that niche a lighted lamp. Take the lamp down and extinguish it. When you have thrown away the wick and poured out the liquor, put it in your vestband and bring it to me. Do not be afraid that the liquor will spoil your clothes, for it is not oil, and the lamp will be dry as soon as it is thrown out. If you should wish for any of the fruit of the garden, you may gather as much as you please." After these words, the magician drew a ring off his finger and put it on one of Aladdin's, telling him that it was a preservative against all evil, while he should observe what he had prescribed to him. After this instruction, he said, "Go down boldly, child, and we shall both be rich all our lives." Aladdin jumped into the cave, descended the steps, and found the 3 halls just as the African magician had described. He went through them with all the precaution the fear of death could inspire, crossed the garden without stopping, took down the lamp from the niche, threw out the wick and the liquor, and as the magician had desired, put it in his vestband. But as he came down from the terrace, he stopped in the garden to observe the fruit, which he only had a glimpse of in crossing it. All the trees were loaded with extraordinary fruit of different colors on each tree. Some bore fruit entirely white, and some clear and transparent as crystal, some pale red and others deeper, some green, blue, and purple, and others yellow. In short, there was fruit of all colors. The white were pearls, the clear and transparent diamonds, the deep red rubies, the green emeralds, the blue turquoises, the purple amethysts, and those that were of yellow cast sapphires. Aladdin was altogether ignorant of their worth, and would have preferred figs and grapes or any other fruits, but though he took them only for colored glass of little value, yet he was so pleased with the variety of the colors and the beauty and extraordinary size of the seeming fruit that he resolved to gather some of every sort, and accordingly filled the 2 new purses his uncle had bought for him with his clothes. Some he wrapped up in the skirts of his vest, which was of silk, large and full, and he crammed his bosom as full as it could hold. Aladdin, having thus loaded himself with riches, returned through the 3 halls with the same precaution, made all the haste he could that he might not make his uncle wait, and soon arrived at the mouth of the cave, where the African magician expected him with the utmost impatience. As soon as Aladdin saw him, he cried out, "Pray, uncle, lend me your hand to help me out." "Give me the lamp first," replied the magician. "It will be troublesome to you." "Indeed, uncle," answered Aladdin, "I cannot now. It is not troublesome to me, but I will as soon as I am up." The African magician was so obstinate that he would have the lamp before he would help him up, and Aladdin, who had encumbered himself so much with his fruit that he could not well get at it, refused to give it to him till he was out of the cave. The African magician, provoked at this obstinate refusal, flew into a passion, threw a little of his incense into the fire which he had taken care to keep in, and no sooner pronounced 2 magical words than the stone which had closed the mouth of the cave moved into its place, with the earth over it in the same manner as it lay at the arrival of the magician and Aladdin. This action of the African magicians plainly showed him to be neither Aladdin's uncle nor Mustafa the tailor's brother, but a true African. Africa is a country whose inhabitants delight most in magic of any in the whole world, and he had applied himself to it from his youth. After 40 years' experience in enchantments and reading of magic books, he had found out that there was in the world a wonderful lamp, the possession of which would render him more powerful than any monarch. And by a late operation of geomancy, he had discovered that this lamp lay concealed in a subterranean place in the midst of China. Fully persuaded of the truth of this discovery, he set out from the farthest part of Africa, and after a long and fatiguing journey came to the town nearest to this treasure. But though he had a certain knowledge of the place where the lamp was, he was not permitted to take it himself, nor to enter the subterranean place, but must receive it from the hands of another person. For this reason he had addressed himself to Aladdin, whom he looked upon as a lad fit to serve his purpose, resolving as soon as he should get the lamp into his hands to sacrifice him to his avarice and wickedness by making the fumigation mentioned before and repeating 2 magical words, the effect of which would remove the stone into its place so that no witness would remain of the transaction. The blow he had given Aladdin was intended to make him obey the more readily and give him the lamp as soon as he should ask for it. But his too great precipitation and his fear lest somebody should come that way and discover what he wished to keep secret produced an effect quite contrary to what he had proposed. When the African magician saw that all his hopes were frustrated forever, he returned the same day for Africa, but went quite round the town and at some distance from it, lest some persons who had observed him walk out with the boy on seeing him come back without him should entertain suspicions and stop him. According to all appearances, there was no prospect of Aladdin being heard of any more. But the magician, when he had contrived his death, forgot the ring that he had put upon his finger, which preserved him, though he knew not its virtue. It may seem astonishing that the loss of that together with the lamp did not drive the magician to despair, but magicians are so much used to misfortunes that they do not lay them to heart, but still feed themselves to the end of life with unsubstantial notions and chimeras. The surprise of Aladdin, who had never suspected this treachery from his pretended uncle, is more easily to be imagined than expressed. When he found himself buried alive, he cried and called out to his uncle to tell him he was ready to give him the lamp, but in vain, since his cries could not be heard. He descended to the bottom of the steps with a design to get into the garden, but the door which was opened before by enchantment was now shut by the same means. He then redoubled his cries, sat down on the steps without any hopes of ever seeing light again, and in a melancholy certainty of passing from the present darkness into that of a speedy death. Aladdin remained in this state 2 days without eating or drinking, and on the 3rd looked upon death as inevitable. Clasping his hands with resignation to the will of God, he said, "There is no strength or power but in the great and high God." In joining his hands, he rubbed the ring which the magician had put on his finger, and of which he knew not yet the virtue. Immediately a genie of enormous size and frightful aspect rose out of the earth, his head reaching the roof of the vault, and said to him, "What wouldst thou have? I am ready to obey thee as the slave of all who may possess the ring on thy finger. I and the other slaves of that ring." At another time, Aladdin, who had not been used to such appearances, would have been so frightened at the sight of so extraordinary a figure that he would not have been able to speak. But the danger he was in made him answer without hesitation, "Whoever thou art, deliver me from this place if thou art able." He had no sooner spoken these words than he found himself on the very spot where the magician had caused the earth to open. It was some time before his eyes could bear the light after being so long in total darkness, but after he had endeavored by degrees to support it, and began to look about him, he was much surprised not to find the earth open, and could not comprehend how he had got so soon out of its bowels. There was nothing to be seen but the place where the fire had been, by which he could nearly judge the situation of the cave. Then, turning himself toward the town, he perceived it at a distance in the midst of the gardens that surrounded it, and saw the way by which the magician had brought him. Returning God thanks to find himself once more in the world, he made the best of his way home. When he got within his mother's door, the joy of seeing her and his weakness for want of food for 3 days made him faint, and he remained for a long time as dead. His mother, who had given him over for lost, seeing him in this condition, omitted nothing to bring him to himself. As soon as he recovered, the first words he spoke were, "Pray, mother, give me something to eat, for I have not put a morsel of anything into my mouth these 3 full days." His mother brought what she had and set it before him. "My son," said she, "be not too eager, for it is dangerous. Eat but little at a time, and take care of yourself. Besides, I would not have you talk. You will have time enough to tell me what has happened to you when you are recovered. It is a great comfort to me to see you again after the affliction I have been in since Friday, and the pains I have taken to learn what has become of you." Aladdin took his mother's advice and ate and drank moderately. When he had done, "Mother," said he to her, "I cannot help complaining of you for abandoning me so easily to the discretion of a man who had a design to kill me, and who at this very moment thinks my death certain. You believed he was my uncle as well as I, and what other thoughts could we entertain of a man who is so kind to me? But I must tell you, mother, he is a rogue and a cheat, and only made me those promises to accomplish my death. But for what reason neither you nor I can guess. You shall judge yourself when you have heard all that passed from the time I left you till he came to the execution of his wicked design." Aladdin then related to his mother all that had happened to him from the Friday when the magician took him to see the palaces and gardens about the town, till they came to the place between the 2 mountains where the great deed was to be performed. How with incense which the magician threw into the fire and some magical words which he pronounced, the earth opened and discovered a cave which led to an inestimable treasure. He did not forget the blow the magician had given him, and in what manner he softened again, and engaged him by great promises in putting a ring on his finger to go down into the cave. He did not omit the least circumstance of what he saw in crossing the 3 halls and the garden, and his taking the lamp which he pulled out of his bosom and showed to his mother, as well as the transparent fruit of different colors which he had gathered in the garden as he returned. But though these fruits were precious stones, brilliant as the sun, she was as ignorant of their worth as was her son. She had been bred in a low rank of life, and her husband's poverty prevented his being possessed of jewels. Nor had she, her relations, or neighbors ever seen any, so that we must not wonder that she regarded them as things of no value. Aladdin put them behind one of the cushions of the sofa and continued his story. When he had come to an end, Aladdin said to his mother, "I need say no more. This is my adventure, and the dangers I have been exposed to since you saw me." His mother heard with much interest this surprising relation, notwithstanding it could be no small affliction to a mother who loved her son tenderly. But yet in the most moving part, which discovered the perfidy of the African magician, she could not help showing by marks of the greatest indignation how much she detested him. And when her son had finished his story, she broke out into 1,000 reproaches against that vile impostor. She called him perfidious traitor, barbarian, assassin, deceiver, magician, and an enemy and destroyer of mankind. "Without doubt, child," added she, "he is a magician, and they are plagues to the world, and by their enchantments and sorceries have commerce with the devil. Bless God for preserving you from his wicked designs, for your death would have been inevitable if you had not called upon him and implored his assistance." She said a great deal more against the magician's treachery, but finding that while she talked Aladdin began to doze, she left him to his repose and retired. Aladdin, who had not closed his eyes while he was in the subterranean abode, slept very soundly till late the next morning, when the first thing he said to his mother was that he wanted something to eat, and that she could not do him a greater kindness than to give him his breakfast. "Alas, child," said she, "I have not a bit of bread to give you. You ate up all the provisions I had in the house yesterday. But have a little patience, and it shall not be long before I will bring you some. I have a little cotton which I have spun. I will go and sell it, buy bread and something for our dinner." "Mother," replied Aladdin, "keep your cotton for another time, and give me the lamp I brought home with me yesterday. I will go and sell it, and the money I shall get for it will serve both for breakfast and dinner, and perhaps supper too." Aladdin's mother took the lamp and said to her son, "Here it is, but it is very dirty. If it was a little cleaner, I believe it would bring something more." She took some fine sand and water to clean it, but had no sooner begun to rub it than in an instant a hideous genie of gigantic size appeared before her, and said to her in a voice like thunder, "What wouldst thou have? I am ready to obey thee as thy slave, and the slave of all those who have that lamp in their hands. I and the other slaves of the lamp." Aladdin's mother, terrified at the sight of the genie, fainted, when the lad who had seen such another phantom in the cavern snatched the lamp out of his mother's hand and said to the genie boldly, "I am hungry. Bring me something to eat." The genie disappeared immediately, and in an instant returned with a large silver tray holding 12 covered dishes of the same metal, which contained the most delicious viands. 6 large white bread cakes on 2 plates, 2 flagons of wine, and 2 silver cups. All of these he placed upon a carpet and disappeared. This was done before Aladdin's mother recovered from her swoon. Aladdin fetched some water and sprinkled it in her face to recover her. Whether that or the smell of the meat brought her to life again, it was not long before she came to herself. "Mother," said Aladdin, "do not mind this. Here is what will put you in heart, and at the same time satisfy my extreme hunger. Do not let such delicious meat get cold." His mother was much surprised to see the great tray, 12 dishes, 6 loaves, and the 2 flagons and cups, and to smell the savory odor which exhaled from the dishes. "Child," said she, "to whom are we obliged for this great plenty and liberality? Has the Sultan been made acquainted with our poverty and had compassion on us?" "It is no matter, mother," said Aladdin. "Let us sit down and eat, for you have almost as much need of breakfast as myself. When we have done, I will tell you." Accordingly, both mother and son sat down and ate with the better relish, as the table was so well furnished. But all the time Aladdin's mother could not forbear looking at and admiring the dishes, though she could not judge whether they were silver or any other metal, and the novelty more than the value attracted her attention. The mother and son sat at breakfast till it was dinner time, and then they thought it would be best to put the 2 meals together. Yet after this they found they should have enough left for supper, and 2 meals for the next day. When Aladdin's mother had taken away what was left, she went and sat by her son on the sofa, saying, "I expect now that you should satisfy my impatience and tell me exactly what passed between the genie and you while I was in a swoon," which he readily complied with. She was in as great amazement at what her son told her as at the appearance of the genie, and said to him, "But, son, what have we to do with genies? I never heard that any of my acquaintance ever had seen one. How came that vile genie to address himself to me and not to you, to whom he had appeared before in the cave?" "Mother," answered Aladdin, "the genie you saw is not the one who appeared to me, though he resembles him in size. No, they had quite different persons and habits. They belonged to different masters. If you remember, he that I first saw called himself the slave of the ring on my finger, and this you saw called himself the slave of the lamp you had in your hand. But I believe you did not hear him, for I think you fainted as soon as he began to speak." "What?" cried the mother. "Was your lamp then the occasion of that cursed genie's addressing himself rather to me than to you? Ah, my son, take it out of my sight and put it where you please. I will never touch it. I had rather you would sell it than run the hazard of being frightened to death again by touching it, and if you would take my advice you would part also with the ring, and not have anything to do with genies, who, as our prophet has told us, are only devils." "With your leave, mother," replied Aladdin, "I shall take care how I sell a lamp which may be so serviceable both to you and me. Have you not been an eyewitness of what it has procured us? And it shall still continue to furnish us with subsistence. My false and wicked uncle would not have taken so much pains and undertaken so long a journey if it had not been to get into his possession this wonderful lamp which he preferred before all the gold and silver which he knew was in the halls. He knew too well the worth of this lamp not to prefer it to so great a treasure, and since chance hath discovered the virtue of it to us, let us make a profitable use of it without making any great show and exciting the envy and jealousy of our neighbors. However, since the genies frighten you so much, I will take it out of your sight and put it where I may find it when I want it. The ring I cannot resolve to part with, for without that you had never seen me again. And though I am alive now, perhaps if it was gone I might not be so some moments hence. Therefore I hope you will give me leave to keep it, and to wear it always on my finger. Who knows what danger you and I may be exposed to, which neither of us can foresee, and from which it may deliver us." As Aladdin's arguments were just, his mother had nothing to say against them. She only replied that he might do what he pleased. For her part, she would have nothing to do with genies, but would wash her hands of them. By the next night they had eaten all the provisions the genie had brought, and the next day Aladdin, who could not bear the thought of hunger, putting one of the silver dishes under his vest, went out early to sell it, and addressing himself to a Jew whom he met in the streets, took him aside and pulling out the plate asked him if he would buy it. The cunning Jew took the dish, examined it, and as soon as he found that it was good silver, asked Aladdin how much he valued it. Aladdin, who knew not its value and never had been used to such traffic, told him he would trust to his judgment and honor. The Jew was somewhat confounded at this plain dealing, and doubting whether Aladdin understood the material or the full value of what he offered to sell, took a piece of gold out of his purse and gave it to him, though it was but the 60th part of the worth of the plate. Aladdin, taking the money very eagerly, retired with so much haste that the Jew, not content with the exorbitancy of his profit, was vexed that he had not penetrated into his ignorance, and was going to run after him to endeavor to get some change out of the piece of gold, but the lad ran so fast and had got so far that it would have been impossible for him to overtake him. Before Aladdin went home, he called at a baker's, bought some cakes of bread, changed his money, and on his return gave the rest to his mother, who went and purchased provisions enough to last them some time. After this manner they lived till Aladdin had sold the 12 dishes singly, as necessity pressed, to the Jew for the same money, who after the first time durst not offer him less for fear of losing so good a bargain. When he had sold the last dish, he had recourse to the tray, which weighed 10 times as much as the dishes, and would have carried it to his old purchaser, but that it was too large and cumbersome. Therefore he was obliged to bring him home with him to his mother's, where after the Jew had examined the weight of the tray, he laid down 10 pieces of gold, with which Aladdin was very well satisfied. They lived on these 10 pieces in a frugal manner, for Aladdin, though formerly used to an idle life, had left off playing with young lads of his own age ever since his adventure with the African magician. He spent his time in walking about and conversing with decent people, with whom he gradually got acquainted. Sometimes he would stop at the principal merchants' shops, where people of distinction met, and listen to their discourse, by which he gained some little knowledge of the world. When all the money was spent, Aladdin had recourse again to the lamp. He took it in his hand, looked for the part where his mother had rubbed it with the sand, and rubbed it also, when the genie immediately appeared and said, "What wouldst thou have? I am ready to obey thee as thy slave, and the slave of all those who have that lamp in their hands, I and the other slaves of the lamp." "I am hungry," said Aladdin. "Bring me something to eat." The genie disappeared and presently returned with a tray and the same number of covered dishes as before, set them down, and vanished. Aladdin's mother, knowing what her son was going to do, went out about some business on purpose to avoid being in the way when the genie came, and when she returned was almost as much surprised as before at the prodigious effect of the lamp. However, she sat down with her son, and when they had eaten as much as they liked, she set enough by to last them 2 or 3 days. As soon as Aladdin found that their provisions were expended, he took one of the dishes and went to look for his Jew again, but passing by the shop of a goldsmith who had the character of a very fair and honest man, the goldsmith, perceiving him, called to him and said, "My lad, I have often observed you go by, loaded as you are at present, and talk with such a Jew, and then come back again empty-handed. I imagine that you carry something which you sell to him, but perhaps you do not know that he is the greatest rogue even among the Jews, and that nobody of prudence will have anything to do with him. If you will show me what you now carry, and it is to be sold, I will give you the full worth of it, or I will direct you to other merchants who will not cheat you." The hopes of getting more money for his plate induced Aladdin to pull it from under his vest and show it to the goldsmith, who at first sight saw that it was made of the finest silver, and asked if he had sold such as that to the Jew, when Aladdin told him that he had sold him 12 such for a piece of gold each. "What a villain!" cried the goldsmith. "But," added he, "my son, what is past cannot be recalled. By showing you the value of this plate, which is of the finest silver we use in our shops, I will let you see how much the Jew has cheated you." The goldsmith took a pair of scales, weighed the dish, and after he had mentioned how much an ounce of fine silver was worth, assured him that his plate would fetch by weight 60 pieces of gold, which he offered to pay down immediately. "If you dispute my honesty," said he, "you may go to any other of our trade, and if he gives you more, I will be bound to forfeit twice as much." Aladdin thanked him for his fair dealing so greatly to his advantage, took the gold, and never after went to any other person, but sold him all his dishes and the tray. Though Aladdin and his mother had an inexhaustible treasure in their lamp, and might have had whatever they wished for, yet they lived with the same frugality as before, except that Aladdin dressed better. As for his mother, she wore no clothes but what she earned by spinning cotton. After their manner of living, it may easily be supposed that the money for which Aladdin had sold the dishes and tray was sufficient to maintain them for some time. During this interval, Aladdin frequented the shops of the principal merchants, where they sold cloth of gold and silver, linens, silk stuffs, and jewelry, and oftentimes joining in their conversation acquired a knowledge of the world and respectable demeanor. By his acquaintance among the jewelers, he came to know that the fruits which he had gathered when he took the lamp were, instead of colored glass, stones of inestimable value, but he had the prudence not to mention this to anyone, not even to his mother.